Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing some common arguments that I hear in regards to religion, specifically Christianity, but some of these do apply to Judaism and Islam and other major religious groups. So we're just going to be doing a brief breakdown of the most popular statements that you will hear from people that don't have the mental flexibility to think outside of what they've been taught their entire lives. So to start with, usually you'll hear, hey, as an atheist, you can't be a moral person. You have no moral framework to base your life on. And in response to that, I would say, well, that's kind of silly because there's a huge percentage of the world's population that does not follow Christianity, Islam, Judaism. Granted, there's a significant majority perhaps that does, but we have entire countries that are predominantly secular, or for example, Sweden, to some extent Japan, Spain just elected an atheist as their prime minister, Norway. Various countries really don't have an official religion, or if they do, nobody really follows it, or the majority of the population has no belief in the supernatural whatsoever. And yet these countries are some of the most prosperous, the most balanced, the most, perhaps you might say, educated. They have very happy populations, very little disturbances in the way of civil unrest and excessive drug use and so on and so forth that we do see in countries that are heavily religious. So, for example, Mexico is hugely Catholic. I don't even know what the percentages is. I'm going to guess over 95%. And it's rife with violence, poverty, and it seems like there's a great deal of civil unrest in certain countries in Northern Africa, areas where it's heavily religious and yet also war-torn and infrastructure issues. Parts of the population don't even have running water or electricity and perhaps have not had those things for generations. And they're ironically countries where they're strongly religious. So there's no correlation that can be found between being strong religious and having morals. We don't see that as in societies. In fact, quite frequently it's the opposite. The more religious that a society is, the more it leans towards bigotry, violence, huge inequalities between the rich and poor. And the more we see a highly secular society, we see a balance between the rich and poor. We see people trying to create equality, no matter what perhaps someone's sexual preferences are, perhaps what their racial background is. Those things are meaningless. Modern secular society says we're all humans. We should all work together. We should all try to help each other. We should all work towards the betterment of the human race more than the betterment of my particular tribe, my particular city, my particular country. And that, I believe, is the future we have to work towards. We are one world. We are all the human race. There is no chosen people. Saying there's a chosen people that are above all others is, strongly bigoted, and it's a mindset that has to go away. But getting back on track, yes, so morality being tied to an understanding of the Bible, an understanding of teachings of some religious dogma, that's kind of silly. it doesn't benefit anyone to try and push that idea, because we've seen more than enough evidence that lots of people don't have religion, and they're perfectly moral people, they're perfectly good people. When it comes down to it, people are people. You're not necessarily going to change those people just because they have religion or just because they don't. They'll still be the same. But rather, we can improve societies in general through the rule of law, and through respecting each other, creating equalities for people of all races, all backgrounds, all genders. That can be accomplished outside of religion. That's not necessary, in my opinion. So another question I hear frequently is, well, you don't have anything to live for. Or, to me, more accurate, you don't have anything to die for. You have nothing to look forward to. Once this life is over, you're just a bag of bones that rots away in the dirt. And yes, that's correct. Some people would say, and some people frequently claim, you must have a nihilistic view of things. Because, hey, what does it all matter? What, in the end, is the purpose of your life if there is nothing after you die? Well, again, that's a very silly perspective in my viewpoint, because when you don't have anything to live for, nothing to look forward to after this life, you tend to focus on enjoying this life and making the most of it because you only have one. And this, in fact, makes you appreciate life much more than you did before. I remember in 30 years of very fundamentalist Pentecostal cult that, in fact, I really didn't care too much about what happened and what went on in this life, because none of it mattered. We were just going to die, and we were going to go enjoy this amusement park for eternity. And all you had to do was just keep your life up to the expectations of the church, and that was it. You were home free. So what did style matter? What did caring for your body really matter if you were just going to die? And what really mattered was beyond this life. Then you tended to be, maybe your priorities weren't on improving this world, improving this society. All that mattered was what was beyond this life. And so you become a better person by embracing this life. You definitely become more attuned to what your legacy will be and what your future is, because you only get one chance. You only get one shot. Nihilism, I don't know. I tend to find meaning in what I enjoy in life and my interactions with people. I don't necessarily see the point of throwing my hands in the air and giving up just because I won't remember it after I die. There's nothing I can do about that. So, yes, in a sense, there is no real purpose or meaning to anything we're doing. And that's fine. I'm okay with that, because I understand there is no alternative. It is a miracle that we are existing here today as intelligent life. And that's a fact. The odds that things were going to turn out in this particular fashion, that we would be the ones to be born in this day and this time, yeah, the odds are astronomical. That's cool. I'm glad I'm here. But I can't change that. I can't choose anything outside of that. So I might as well make the best of it and move forward. That's that. Frequently, we hear Christians really emphasizing that if you don't believe the Bible, if you don't accept the Bible as your ultimate guide, then in fact, what do you have to base your life on? And this is a little bit of a play on morality, but fundamentalist Christians take it a little bit further. They're not so much looking at the concept of morality, but they're also treating the Bible as like this magnificent guide to everything you do, see, understand. They look at it as like the ultimate source of wisdom, as the guidebook to everything you do in your life, which is a little extreme, but I do remember that was the mentality that I grew up with. That was a very common way of thinking. And in response to that, I would have to say, obviously, a book that endorses slavery, that treats women as second-class citizens, that has to be rejected out of hand. Any book that tells you, hey, listen, you can't eat shellfish, you can't mix two different fabrics in the same garment. Here's the correct method of determining a good price when you're selling your daughter into slavery. Here's the rule book and guidelines for beating your slaves. We can't take that book and say this is the basis for how we're going to live our lives. Any book that endorses genocide, that endorses the slaughter of innocent babies, that heavily reinforces this idea of bigotry and one race above all others, one race chosen by God, and somehow that's fair, somehow that's our guide to morality. It doesn't wash. And if you're going to use that as the basis for your life, it's going to mess up your priorities one way or the other. There was a great man named Christopher Hitchens who said, religion poisons everything. And that is very much the case in point. Religions that focus so heavily on the Bible and its teachings, they ended up twisting societies, causing irreparable harm. And we see that as evidence in these countries that are heavily religious, are heavily bigoted, they're heavily strewn with various types of civil wars, there's religious conflict, division between people. Perhaps that's the greatest sin religion has caused, is causing a strife and division between really perfectly ordinary people, and people that otherwise would not have disagreements suddenly have disagreements because they're two different religious factions, as minutely divided as that can possibly be. Are you a Reformed Baptist, or are you original Baptist or whatever? Are you the, as they say, Orthodox Jew, or are you Reformed Jew? Suddenly, two people that are almost identical in every way, they have reason to be at each other's throat, solely caused by religion, solely caused by somebody's interpretation of a book written 3,000 years ago by Bronze Age goat herders. It does not benefit anyone to use religion as a bludgeoning tool to affect how you judge people, and to affect how you live your life. What it boils down to is it creates division and problems where none existed previously. So again, using the Bible as your measuring stick for morality, as your measuring stick for how you make decisions in life, how you determine what's wisdom and what's not, it's a huge fallacy. It's completely uncalled for in 2018. We have better methods. We have better measurements of morality than an old book. And another area that I hear pretty frequently is, people want to bring up the great dictators of the 20th century and say, well, look, this is where atheism takes you, is Hitler and Pol Pot and Mussolini and Mao Zedong. These are all religious people, or these are all atheistic people, and this is what that ends up taking you, is to the ultimate disregard for human life and survival of the fittest is the only thing that matters. Well, no, that's pretty narrow and misguided. I mean, if we wanted to really be honest about it, we could nitpick all this, but what it boils down to is just because one famous figure in history believes something, that does not justify their actions one way or the other, for good or for bad. For example, we could look at particular leaders that were heavily religious and they've committed massive atrocities. Well, great. Should we then lay that blame at the foot of their belief system, or lay the blame on that individual for where they've gone? I mean, it wouldn't be fair to judge Christianity on the sins of Christian leaders that were, say, executed large numbers of people, caused great wars, and there would be a fair number of those. But the simple fact of the matter is, a person is responsible for their actions. Their belief system should not be used to stain the entire way of thought. That's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, to turn that around on someone, you could say, well, Hitler was in fact endorsed by the Catholic Church. He said many times, he said in the first chapter of Mein Kampf, he is a servant of God. He is doing God's work. Every German soldier in World War II had a three-word phrase stamped on their belt buckles: Gott mit uns, or God is with us. This was on the belt buckles of the Wehrmacht as they went into Poland and France, and they executed who knows how many millions of people. So it's a simple fact that you could point your finger either way. Hitler's actions shouldn't be used to lay blame on Christianity, just as maybe a famous serial killer or something that happens to be atheist for some reason, somehow that stains that entire way of thinking. It's silly. Really, we should judge a way of thinking or a way of perhaps teaching by its virtues, based on what it says, not necessarily just because someone claims to be a member of it. The exception to that being if that moral system specifically tells people to go out and kill people. I mean, it's fairly obvious that Islam pretty much says flat out, kill the unbelievers. It says it multiple times. Torture them, enslave them, kill them. It's very, very clear. Islam teaches you to kill the unbelievers. Now, what Christians are not so happy to hear, perhaps, is the Bible says the exact same thing. If someone entices you to go serve other gods, you are supposed to be the first one to reach out and kill them. It says it very clearly, Book of Deuteronomy. I don't have chapter and verse in front of me, but it's pretty easy to look it up with Google. So we have multiple genocides and atrocities in the Old Testament. Obviously, you could say the Christians are just as violent, capable of violence as the Muslims. It's just that Christianity has been tamed by secular society over the years and generations to be something that originally it was not. And that evolution, that change within that belief system has made it more appealing, more relatable in the modern society. Whereas Islam, certain countries have tried to remain faithful to the roots. And of course, those roots are violent. And of course, this puts them at odds with modern society. And so we are very much at war with not necessarily Islam. We are at war with fundamentalism, because a fundamental Christian is just as bad or worse than a fundamental Islamist. So that fact remains. People that have a literal interpretation of these holy books tend to be violent people. They tend to be bigoted. They tend to be savage. They have perhaps little regard for human life, despite what they claim to. So using the Bible, the Quran, using these holy books as your judgment stick for morality, for life, for wisdom, obviously there's some flaws in that. Another thing I see frequently is, modern Christians, modern religious people tend to not have a problem with science. They tend to not have a problem with medical discoveries and breakthroughs. The real fundamentalism, adherents, the truly pure Christians and Muslims, on the other hand, are a very different story. They tend to focus on, look, the Bible's true no matter what. The Bible has to be literally interpreted. And so these are the people that are truly misguided because they focus so much on, the world was created in 7 days 5,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago. And 4,000 years ago, there was a worldwide flood, wiped out all of the earth and all of the living creatures. Well, these are the most misguided people because they're willing to reject all of the advances of science. They're willing to throw out years and years of advancements in medical technology and biology and geology. They're willing to throw it all out to cling to some outdated book. And it's a truly dangerous mindset because we cannot go forward as a human race. We cannot move forward as a society until we're all willing to accept, hey, the facts are the facts. This is what we've proven to be the case. This is the evidence for it. A Christian that says, hey, I don't believe in evolution. Hey, I believe in a global flood. I believe in Adam and Eve. These are the pivotal things that will tell you this is either a progressive Christian that's at least willing to accept what's already been proven, or you're talking to someone that you're probably not going to get anywhere with because they're extremely stubborn, extremely pig-headed. They're simply not going to listen to anything you have to say. And so if someone comes up to you and says, do you believe in evolution? Or don't you believe in the creation story, intelligent design? Pretty much what you have to come back to is you have to stress the importance of evidence for what you believe. You have to stress the importance of proving why you believe what you believe, or what you know, instead of trying to, just play the blame game and point fingers. And really, I remember growing up in that environment and being taught in the private schools, evolution was a lie, taught by secular scientists for the point of furthering something. I don't know the original, what was the rationale behind it, but it's very dangerous to fundamentalism adherents to try and imagine the concept of a Garden of Eden being false or mythological in nature. And so they're very resistant to this idea of, all of life came from other life. There's that we're related to chimpanzees, that we're a cousin to the chimpanzees. It's horrific to their way of thinking, in their mind, and they will not accept it. But this is precisely what tells you you're dealing with a group of people that are simply not willing to change. They're never willing to listen to something outside of what they've always been taught. And they're very securely locked into this bubble mentality. They're trapped in this cult where they're never going to change. And so the most important thing that I can stress, and if you're dealing with someone that's willing to listen at all, you have to teach them the importance of neutral sources. You have to teach them the importance of finding information without bias. By that I mean, and this is probably the most important thing I'll try and stress in this video, You can't go to a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon or a Scientologist or any other modern cult and say, I wanted some information about your group, because they're going to give you information that's been thoroughly whitewashed, and they will say, this is the history of our group, this is the history of what we believe, this is why what we believe is correct and it's true, when in fact, if you went to a neutral source outside of that organization, you would get a completely different story. You would get something maybe much more in line with the truth. You would get a unvarnished vision of what their organization was really based on, what its history really was. And so that's what you have to do if you're a Pentecostal, if you're a Baptist, if you're any kind of a Muslim, Hindu, any religious group whatsoever, or even not religion, but any group at all. You have to find a neutral source. Honestly, stick with Wikipedia if you have to. Wikipedia is very well moderated these days. If you don't have a good, reliable source for information, your edit will get kicked out. Most of the stuff on Wikipedia is very accurate, very reliable. At the very least, consider multiple sources of information, find which ones agree with each other. If you look at two different articles and they say completely different conclusions, they give you totally different backgrounds and sources, you have to go to a third, you have to go to a fourth, until you see a concise picture of what makes sense. But going directly to an organization and saying, I want to know the history of your organization, well, again, you're going to be presented with a biased viewpoint of that. When I left my group, when I made it out of Pentecost, what I had to do was find neutral sources of information. And it's only through that I was able to discover the Pentecostal movement has only been around for barely 120 years. Right around 1900 is when they really got traction and they took off. But nothing existed before then. There was no history of a movement by that name or with those teachings anywhere in the millennia prior to that 1900s United States outbreak. So that kind of information is only going to come from unbiased, untainted sources. And that's what you have to go by if you're going to really get the facts, if you're going to really get the full picture of what you're trying to discover. And so for me, I was teaching a Bible study to a nice young couple, and they were very smart, they were very educated, they knew the Bible, and they challenged me to find good information to explain the teachings of the Pentecostal church that they did not agree with. And so in the process of trying to find good information to teach them was when I discovered the speaking in tongues doctrine is really just some weird stuff. It's really not founded in Scripture, according to, again, neutral, unbiased sources. From there, I looked into the history of the Pentecostal church. Same conclusion. From neutral, unbiased sources, the Pentecostal movement is not even 120 years old, and it's very much a modern cult. And it's been just created out of whole cloth. From there, I continue that process of discovery and seeking out the best source of information for the sake of really digging into the foundation of the entire Christian belief. And that's where I kind of found the solid foundation of, hey, there's no supernatural existence at all. There is nothing beyond this life. And that's the only viewpoint that holds up to scrutiny, that holds up to evidence. This is what we can prove. Everything else is speculation or hallucination or something conjured in the human mind that does not have a basis in fact. So, I know I rambled a little bit, but this is just kind of some ideas I had bouncing around my head. I wanted to get them out. And I know it's been a while since the last video, so I wanted to get some content out there for you guys to chew on. And I'll post a link below to the blog and some other videos so you get a chance to check them out. But as always, do your own research and challenge your own conclusions, and don't be afraid to change your viewpoint if the facts don't support it. And have a great one, guys. Thanks for watching.